So we're 1665. Pretty high rated. 1647 is our opponent. Let's go. E4. And we're mostly still meeting. Okay, so C5. And we've been playing the Smith-Morra with a lot of success in the speedrun. Let's continue that practice. And ooh, an accepted Smith-Morra. Let's go. Okay, e5. Now, I've actually seen this move a lot at this level, which is new to me because, I mean, it's a very anti-positional move. It weakens the d5 square tremendously. Black does sometimes play this move in the Smith-Morra, but never this early. We want to develop our pieces normally, as we normally do in the Smith-Morra, and we have massive control. We have total control over the square. So we want to start by getting the bishop out to c4. And we can also think about putting early pressure on the f7 pawn. We can do that by getting the queen out to b3. I think everybody's familiar with this idea by now. When the pawn on c2 is sacrificed early, queen b3 related ideas become a thing. And speaking of which, queen b3 here is very possible, but we could also amend that in a slightly more tactical way. So what is possible here on the theme of queen b3? So we could start with bishop takes f7 check. There's a very interesting line there. After queen b3 check, black can actually play d5 using the tempo that he has while we're taking this bishop to shove this pawn down to d4. So the crazy thing is that I actually think queen b3 might be better than bishop takes f7 check in this particular instance. So we're actually going to go queen b3, and after the game, I'll show you why I'm insistent on playing it this way. Now, which piece do we want to recapture with? Our opponent probably feels relieved that we didn't take on f7, but I think that this is much more likely to result in a quick win. What we definitely want to take with a pawn, we want to keep the battery alive, and we want to keep the pressure on f7. In addition, taking with a pawn gives this dark squared bishop a very, very powerful developing square on a3. We could put the bishop there right now, but our opponent has left f7 hanging. We're definitely taking that. And I'm thinking that we could follow up by playing bishop a3 check. And this is going to get really dicey for black really, really fast. Okay, so this is not GG yet, by the way. This is not quite as easy as it may appear. As you'll see, black has a couple of defensive options. But I think if we develop properly, we should be close to winning. Let's start with bishop a3 check. And then after d6, which is forced, let's think. So the first option would be to put more pressure on the d6 pawn. This seems like a logical thing to do. So probably some of you are thinking, let's go rook d1. The problem with rook d1 is black has knight takes e4, simultaneously taking that pawn and then defending d6. So we have to find a response to knight takes e4. Now, I actually think that the response to knight takes... Okay, there's an interesting line there that I'm trying to puzzle out. So rook d1, knight takes e4 is one option. We could investigate that further. The other option is to simply develop our pieces. We could just play knight f3 and castle and hold off on attacking the d6 pawn until we're fully developed. But my intuition is telling me that rook d1 has to be the move, and there has to be something after knight takes e4. We'll figure out what it is if black plays it, but I'm just going to go rook d1 intuitively, and then we'll cross that bridge if we get there. Okay, so we have gotten there. And this is, I think, an instructive moment because most people are probably thinking, let's get rid of this knight. So you're thinking of f3 or queen d5, but neither of these moves seems as convincing to me as perhaps it does to you, because black will have ways of counterattacking the f7 bishop. So for example, if white plays f3, black has the nasty move queen out to f6, and then if you calculate f takes e4, queen takes f7, that is still a little bit uncertain. But in that line, I actually think white is able to transform the position into a very favorable endgame. So f3 is one very viable option. Let's just go f3. Let's play this simple. In an actual over-the-board game, I would very seriously consider playing knight f3 and just getting our pieces out, basically keeping the tension, and then trying to castle. Okay, queen h4 check. I had a feeling that black would play this, but it's not good. We go g3, and if black takes on g3, and then there's just checkmate on d6. So let's see if black is able to figure... Yeah, he is able to figure out the best move, which is queen f6. And now I think that we have... Okay, so we've got a couple of options here. This is not GG yet. I mean, black is somehow... He's holding on, which is pretty incredible. I think that we need to transform our advantage. Right now we have this attack. What we need to do is just take the knight on e4, and then take the pawn on d6, either with the rook or with the bishop, and we'll probably end up getting some sort of an endgame where we're up a pawn and we have a tremendous initiative. So you got to be able to do that when you're attacking and say, okay, this form of the attack isn't working out exactly like I wanted it to, so we're going to take the attack and then transform it into a different type of advantage. Now, how should we take on d6? We have two approaches here. The one hand we could take with the bishop and then collect black's pawns. We could play bishop takes and then bishop takes e5. On the other hand, we could say, well, I don't care as much about the e5 pawn. I care more about the initiative against black's king. I like rook takes d6. I feel like this contains a lot more pizzazz because it sets up a potential discovery, and it, we'll be able to win the e5 pawn when we want to. That pawn on e5 is a sitting duck. We can get our knight out to f3 later. I don't think we'll have a problem winning that pawn. I think we need to put the emphasis on quick development and see how far that can get us. Okay, queen takes b3. Our opponent continues to play this pretty accurately. A takes b3, and king e8 is correct also. Okay, so we need to get our knight out to f3. And now after knight c6, black is actually holding the balance pretty nicely. So let's complete our development. Let's castle. And let's continue trying to put pressure on black in this endgame. I'm very impressed with our opponent's defensive capabilities here. Maybe we should have taken with the bishop after all. But something tells me that this position is very, very hard to play for black. We have a rook that's sandwiched on d6, and we need to keep the attack going. We cannot waste time, and we cannot let black keep consolidating. So what move allows us to keep the initiative going? This is a very natural move to me, because it creates a lot more threats, and that move is knight out to g5, exactly. So the knight can potentially maneuver to e6. It can also go to f7. I mean, there's a lot of options here. Rook d8. So here, very important to avoid taking on d8. You might think, oh, we take on d8 and then go knight f7 with the fork. But after rook takes d8, black can take back with a knight, and then we won't be able to get our knight into f7. So the way we want to play this is to go with the immediate knight f7. Now, this isn't exactly a fork, because obviously black plays rook takes d6. Now, interesting question, what do we recapture with? This is actually a very tricky question, because I feel like some of you might intuitively gravitate toward taking with the bishop because it keeps the attack on the rook on h8. But if you calculate that out, bishop takes d6, black plays rook g8, and yes, we win the pawn on e5, but you have to remember that in the endgame, an extra pawn isn't always the end of the world, and what's going to end up happening is that you get an opposite-colored bishop endgame where black is able to get his pieces out. A much better option is to take with the knight for two reasons. First of all, this is a fork, so we still are able to win a pawn. But the most important reason is that we pave the way for the rook to infiltrate to f7, which is exactly what we're going to do right now. And we're going to end up winning a lot more than just one pawn. We're probably going to end up winning two pawns, and we're going to get a huge attack against black's king. So which pawn do we take first? Well, if you compare, we can take b7 with the rook, or we can take g7 with the rook. Well, think about it. Obviously, we should take g7 with the rook because that attacks the bishop. And then we can take b7 with the knight in order to prevent black from putting his rook on f8. Notice what black just did there. He's trying to checkmate us on f1. That's a tricky idea, but our bishop is preventing the rook from coming to f8. So now knight takes b7. We've got our own mating ideas. Knight c5 is very, very close to mate. So we should be able to finish this one off pretty smoothly. That knight on c6 has also lost its supporting pawn. So the move rook c7 could end up being very, very strong. The knight simply doesn't have a lot of breathing room or squares to go to. Does that make sense? So black is down two pawns, and we've got the king fully surrounded. King f6. And as we discussed, where should the rook go? Well, there's only one square available to the rook, and it's c7. Right? It's literally the only move. Literally the only move. Every other square is controlled by black's pieces. d7 was controlled by the bishop. And now knight d8 loses on the spot. I won't tell you why just yet in case he plays it. Knight b8 is probably the only move for black. And okay, our opponent finds it. Now, in such positions, I mean, on the one hand, you have to play aggressively and actively, but on the other hand, it's important not to rush too much and to make improving moves when possible so that we don't have to worry about various headaches. So this is a good example, right? This king on g1, black has this constant idea of putting a rook on f1 and checkmating us. I don't want to deal with that headache, particularly in time pressure. So one thing we could do to improve our position is just get the king to e3, a very safe central square, and then we could worry about picking up the rest of black's pawns. So we make our improvements first. This helps us survive time pressure. Let's go king e3. Forget about everything else, and then we're going to start worrying about bishop d6 and knight back to c5 and other moves that aim to win black's other pawns. This is a nice example of sort of the Russian school of chess. You can call it whatever you want, but it's this idea of not, making improvements first before you barrel into complications. Knight d7. Okay, so lots of options here. We could go knight back to d6 and try to go to f7. I like the concept of trading knights here. Since we're up 2 pawns, an opposite colored bishop endgame doesn't worry me too much. I feel like it's already going to be totally winning. And we're very likely to win a 3rd pawn because black's got pawns all over the board. They're all scattered. They're all weak. We're definitely going to win a 3rd pawn here. Okay, knight b6, and case in point, we can take a7. And I'm hoping that black plays rook d8 because we have a really, really pretty tactic if rook d8 happens. Something tells me, though, that he might play rook c8. Okay, so we have a 3rd pawn in the bag. We've got connected passers, which we can start pushing on the very next move. We can play c4, and then we can move the knight back and just keep pushing the c-pawn. That's the simplest plan. Very, very simple. I mean, it's easy to convert these endgames. If you don't blunder anything, it goes rook a8. I mean, that plays right into our hands. At this point, we're up 3 pawns, and we're actually even going to be up 4. If you think about it, the e5 pawn is a total sitting duck. How can we combine our bishop and knight in order to win the e5 pawn? What 2 moves can we make in order to go up 4 pawns? Yeah, we can start with knight d3, not knight d7, because the bishop is covering that square. Don't forget about these. And now bishop d6. And now we're up 4 pawns, and the game is over. Knight d7 would have hung the knight. Okay, bishop takes e5, check. And that's it. Now we start pushing our pawns in no particular order. It doesn't really matter. I would even bring the king up to d4, just to help supervise the progress of the pawns, and then we can continue pushing c5, b4. We can push indiscriminately. All of our pieces are defending each other. We really don't have to worry about anything else. Just keep pushing. b5, c5, c4. The only thing is bishop b2 might happen, and then we're going to have to move our bishop, but that's the only threat that black can make. Okay, c5, and then c6, and then b6. Okay, this is pretty easy and pretty fun. Thank you, Burritos Galore. Okay, knight takes c5 check, and now we're also winning the bishop on top of everything else. That was a nice game. That was not easy at all, and our opponent defended very, very well. So I'm sure that I probably had more efficient ways to win right out of the opening, but we can take a look with an engine, actually. We can take a look with an engine, just because this game in particular, I feel like there was a lot of tactical action, and it would be a good idea to see where I went wrong. I'm sure I made quite a few mistakes and didn't exploit this in the best way. So let's see. Okay, the accuracy is not bad. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I had thought. Okay, so let's see. So yeah, e5 is a big mistake. I don't know why it's like not giving me the kind of review that I want. Okay. Anyways, so queen b3 is one of the top moves. I wanted to show why bishop takes f7 check is wrong. This is a very instructive moment. And I can already tell by the eval bar that it's wrong. So I've shut down the computer lines for the time being because I want people to think of this on their own. Okay, so queen b3 check. Now, the way you might be thinking of this is, okay, the king moves away. We take on b4. We've restored material equality. The king has lost castling rights. We have all of the advantages of our position. But in this position, black has a really cool resource. And if you were listening carefully, I actually mentioned it during the game. Black can play the move d5, and the way that this works is, well, white has to waste a tempo recapturing the bishop because we sacrificed it. And while we do that, black pushes this pawn down to d4. Maybe actually black starts with knight c6. If we look at the computer eval, yeah, knight c6 is a much better idea here, developing with tempo, and if the queen drops back to b3, trying to pin the pawn, then black has knight d4. So all of a sudden, black gets this initiative because we had to waste time capturing the bishop. So this very concrete tactical reason actually means that bishop takes f7 is a bad move, and queen b3 is correct, as you can see. Okay, so bishop c3, bc, knight f6. And yeah, this is completely winning. So bishop a3 check, d6, rook d1, knight takes e4. And here we didn't find the correct idea. f3 is a pretty significant mistake. It's still winning. The best move, though, was bishop back to d5. Okay, so here's what I missed. I completely forgot that we're also attacking b7. I just forgot that that pawn is hanging. I forgot that that pawn is hanging. The reason I rejected bishop d5 is because it blocks the rook's contact with the d6 pawn. And I didn't realize that, for example, in this line, bishop c5, dc, and then bishop takes b7 wins the game, because it's an attack on the queen and an attack on the rook. I just forgot about the b7 pawn. This just shows you how important it is not to be narrow-minded when you're attacking, and to pay attention to all potential pressure points in the position. So bishop d5 is one winning move. The other is the same idea, bishop h5 and then bishop f3, again, skewering the knight and the b7 pawn. So this b7 pawn is quite pivotal to the correct winning path. Bishop d5 is a really nice move. It's very clinical, very surgical. So f3, queen h4, g3, queen f6. And again, f takes e4 mistake. You know, at this point, I had already kind of settled on this endgame, and this actually loses most of white's advantage. So not a good job converting this by me. Again, we should have gone bishop d5, but again, I had forgotten about the b7 pawn. I wasn't looking at it. This just shows you that tunnel vision happens at my level as well. I completely tunnel vision this position. I wasn't even looking at this pawn. I forgot that the queen was making contact with it. And the other winning move is bishop h5. And if knight c5, oh my goodness, rook takes d6. Look at that tactic. What a move. Knight takes b3, rook d8 is checkmate. Queen takes d6, queen f7 is checkmate. So the position had a lot more tactical potential than I had realized. And this is... Bishop h5 is winning on the spot. Black has to give up the knight. And it's over. And by the way, folks, knight takes g3 doesn't work because of bishop takes d6, and black has to give the queen up. So very instructive. Just shows you that... I don't know what this shows exactly, but I had already kind of made up my mind to go for this endgame, and I thought white is like winning here, when in fact the advantage is quite small. The advantage is quite small. Thank you, A Voice, for the 2 months. And apparently the only move to keep a black's position under control is king f7, which looks completely counterintuitive because it keeps the king on the f file, which looks counterproductive because white's going to castle. But the point is, you go rook e8, and if white castles, you tuck the king away on g8. It's like an artificial castle. And if white plays knight takes e5, obviously you can't take because of checkmate. Bishop h3, rook f2, and black is able to get all of his pieces out. Knight c6, knight takes e6, rook takes e4, intermezzo threatening rook e1 checkmate. This is how computers play, and apparently black equalizes here. So this is obviously one of the dangers of analyzing with an engine, is like, now you think, oh, well, this was all pretty easy. I guess nobody's actually thinking that, though. And king f7 is not a move I would even expect the GM to play. I was positive that king e8 is the only move. Yeah, brilliant line. King f7, rook e8, all of a sudden black artificially castles with no other pieces developed, and black is just okay. So king e8, knight f3, and at this point, black's position sucks. Castles, bishop g4. Bishop g4 is another inaccuracy. This allows the knight to get into g5. And after knight f7, I think black never had any more chances. Takes. And here I think we played very accurately. Rook g7, bishop h3, knight b7, rook c7, king f2. And you notice that king f2 is among the top moves. So the computer also approves of this kind of play. Knight c5. Yeah, and I think we never really let black go after that. Wow, a lot was packed into those first 10-15 moves. A lot was packed into the first 10-15 moves. Oh, knight d8. Wait, knight d8 here? Because of bishop e7 check with a fork. There was a nice tactic a little bit later on when we were already completely winning. I was hoping that black would go rook d8. Can somebody find an elegant way to win more material here? Obviously, we can take on h7, and this is completely winning. There's a cool little trick here. Who sees it? Yeah, knight e6 check, bishop takes e6, bishop e7 check with a fork. Using both minor pieces to win the rook. That's actually kind of cool. So So the moral of the story is that I made up my mind. Wait, first of all, don't automatically go for these kinds of tactics because they can be wrong. In this case, queen b3 is correct. Made up my mind too quickly about going for that endgame rather than evaluating the options and looking at all sides of the board when you're attacking. And the funny thing is, I talk to my students often about this idea that when you're attacking, it's so easy to tunnel vision one side of the board and to forget that something on the other side of the board, such as a hanging piece, could play a very direct role in the attack one way or another, because obviously the board is interconnected. And I have a good example of one of my games where I was able to apply that and win. Yeah, so basically, it's a case of attack on both sides of the board. So I got this attack down the H file, as you can see. I started pushing my H pawn in this position, and then I traded pawns. I opened up the H file, and I got my pieces there. So after King G7, I did something cool. Who can tell me what is the fastest way of getting a rook to the H file? This is a very straightforward concept, but just as a little warm-up exercise. And obviously, I'm ignoring the E7 pawn. I don't give a about that pawn. The only thing I care about is getting the rook to the H file. So we take the horsey, forcing BC, and now we just go knight E2. Very good. Not bishop D3. Mathematically, taking the knight is the fastest way because this forces black to respond. Okay, so we get a rook to H1. So here it's important to resist the urge to give the check because it actually helps black's king go where he wants to go anyway. So we get the knight into the attack. And in this position, I found a very, very nice tactic that's very directly based on something on the other side of the board. And I'll give you guys a chance to think about this. White to play and find a crushing tactical blow on the king side. There's just not that much that you can do, which I think helps people out. There's something on the king side that white can do. It's not e6. E6, there's bishop takes e6. And black survives. Yeah, very good. Knight takes g6. And the point is this. If black plays king takes g6, and this is where the lesson is applied, we don't mate the king. That's not the point of the combination. We go queen h5 check, and all of a sudden, we play e takes f6 check, and whoop, the queen on a5 is hanging, and white wins the queen. So noticing that queen is crucial. And if black plays knight takes g6, then we give queen h7 check, and then we take the knight, and we win easily. So something similar happened in the game. My opponent played b3. I basically ignored it. I took it and then played queen h5. bc, king takes c2, knight takes g6, and now the sexiest move of the game. My opponent actually didn't see this for some reason. He was expecting queen h7 check. That's not what I did, though. What did I do? I played e6 check, and he resigned because the queen is lost on a5. So the importance of the other side of the board when you're attacking it cannot be overstated. So back to the speedrun game, full board vision, and here looking at the pawn on b7 was critical. Playing bishop d5, noticing that this pawn being hanging is the key to the victory for white. Okay, guys, that concludes the analysis. And I think that is going to conclude the stream. Hope you enjoyed. See you guys later. Thank you so much for the support. Thanks for hanging out, everybody.